Yeah. Yeah, a little bit more.
Hi, we'll go ahead and get started now. He's serious tonight. He's got a map up there and everything. So we're gonna have a serious about stuff. Good to see everybody tonight. Let's start off with prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for the safety and the help you've given us and been able to bring us here tonight so that we might study your word. We pray that you would be with those that are sick or otherwise can't be with us. Just let them know that we love them. And your will be done with them. Just ask you to put your arms around them, give them a hug. Father, be with us now as we sing our praises to you, as we open our hearts, open our minds, and study your word, that everything that we might see, everything that we might say, everything that we might sing, be pleasing and uplifting to you, because we do love you. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. How about let's start off with 183. 183. Oh, how I love Jesus. That's a good one. 365 days a year.
How about 147?
147? 147. Leaning on the everlasting arm. That's a good 57 Ford pickup
129.
129.
129.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
129. Amen. There's some good ones.
Thanks, Jesus. No, ma'am. I'm way past that.
All right, we're gonna be in Isaiah 23 tonight. Isaiah 23, and in the blank there for your notes, it's just one word, and it's tire, T-Y-R-E, T-Y-R-E. So that's letter K there in your notes under Roman numeral number 1, so keep that in mind there. And it also came across, it was, I guess better late than never, came across this. This is actually an excellent map, and it's talking about all the different areas we've already covered and probably will cover. And so I think we came across that. I figured we're talking about all these different lands. It's probably good to get a little bird's eye view as far as what we're talking about each week and where we're talking about. So anyway, so we're on Tyre there with a little blue arrow is, so if you kind of get a gist, when we're talking about Israel and Judah, which is to the south, that's where that is. We talked about Babylon just a few weeks ago, way over to the far east there. We talked about Media. I believe that was last week. We talked about Media, Assyria, and it's amazing too how far away these areas are. And I mean, talking about back then, it was just on horse, right? So, I mean, to invade a country, you almost have to remember where you're going after a little while, I would imagine. But here, again, you get a good bird's eye view of everything. You see where the Euphrates River is. This goes all the way down to Babylon and all the way back up to Beth Eden, up to the north, and actually goes all the way up to the middle there, just to the left of Ararat. So all the way up almost to the Black Sea is how far that actually travels. So you can see that there. So anyway, so I thought this would be kind of informative just to keep up there each week, and then we can kind of put the little marker on the name of the city that we're talking about as we go along. So hopefully that'll be helpful. All right, so we're going to be in Isaiah 23 tonight, and beginning in verse 1. And here again, we're talking about the city of Tyre, and it says the burden, or again, as we've been mentioning along the way, that word burden there is another word of judgment. So the burden or the judgment or the decree against Tyre, and it says, "Wail, you ships of Tarshish." Does that ring a bell, that name of that?
No.
What do we know that from?
That's where Paul's from.
I'm sorry?
That's where Paul's from.
Paul's from, yeah, exactly. Says, for it laid waste so that there is no house, no harbor from the land of Cyprus. It is revealed to them. Be still, you inhabitants of the coastland, you merchants of Sidon, whom those who cross the sea have filled. Going on down to verse 3, and on great waters the grain of Shiloh, the harvest of the river is her revenue, and she is a marketplace for the nations. Be ashamed, O Sidon, for the sea has spoken, the strength of the sea, saying, I do not labor nor bring forth children, neither do I rear young men nor bring up virgins. When the report reaches Egypt, they also will be in agony at the report of Tyre. So here a little bit of background here on this city. To the north of Israel, Tyre was the leading city of Phoenicia at that time. The great maritime power of the ancient world was basically known to be Tyre. Because it was such an important harbor and center for shipping, Tyre was synonymous with commerce and also materialism. And you think about our world today, does that not kind of define even our own nation at this time? And you think about a lot of other nations. And they base their strength and they base everything about them, their importance, even at times, just on their materialism and what they have, and not necessarily on God at all, right? And so this was also part of their fall and part of the judgment. And the reason for the judgment was because they'd forgotten God. They were totally, and you think about the Phoenicians, Maxine and I were talking about that just earlier, and I was watching a video today that someone had sent to me, and talking about the Phoenicians and how that they sacrificed children and individuals to their gods and these types of things. And you think about our own nation. Think about even with abortion. It's really the same thing. Just because they make it lawful doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually pleasing to God at all. And here we see the same thing going on. So here, so it's the leading city of Phoenicia. So once again, with that, and it's not just that they were forgetting God and that they were this big city and just with materialism, but ultimately they were also sinning. The gods that they were worshiping, their false gods, they were also murdering individuals. And in their own right, they thought they were just sacrificing and appeasing their God. So we see all of this going on, and so keep that in mind as we're going on. Tyre is also the, quote-unquote, the Babylon of the sea. We think about Babylon, if you look up in the far right corner there, or in the middle, actually to the right, to the east, we see Babylon there, and Babylon was actually one of the greatest cities in the known world. We've already talked about them and how they've already been prophesied it was going to be judged upon. And why? Because of their sinfulness and because of how their neglect of God. And then now we're seeing even in Tyre. And you think that, I'm sure in their minds, whenever these judgments were coming, that as they went along, you can see the difference in even the amount of miles, I'm sure, from, say, Babylon over to Tyre. And if there is one city that was being judged, they probably think, well, we're way over here. We're kind of exempt from all that. And that's not how God works, is it? If you're to be judged because of your sinfulness, it doesn't matter where you are. He's going to carry out that judgment. So Tyre was the Babylon of the sea. Because of their excellent harbor and seamanship, they established a commercial empire far greater than one would expect, given their size and military power. Tyre was also a city in two parts, an inland city and also an island city. The inland city was conquered by the Assyrians and the Babylonians, just as Isaiah prophesied. And again, who was it that actually, in the end, overtook them? It was actually other false nations. We've been talking about that along the way, too. God's not always just using his people. And what's the problem with his people right now? They're being judged for their own sinfulness. So God's hands upon them. And then now God's using even false nations or not false nations, but nations that are believing in false gods and those who are away from him anyway, to also judge one another. And so we see that, and we've been talking about that the last few weeks as well. The island city was conquered later. Maxine brought that up just a few minutes ago, by Alexander the Great in 332 BC. And the influence of Tyre was both good and bad for Israel. King Hiram of Tyre supplied David and Solomon great timbers for the building of the temple and other projects. This can be seen in 2 Samuel 5 and also 1 Kings chapter 5 in those verses there. But Hiram also gave Solomon sailors so Israel could build their commerce by sea. But later Tyre gave Israel one of the worst rulers Israel ever had, Jezebel, the wife of King Ahab of Israel. And so we know, we've been talking about King Ahab before, and also we have Jezebel, who was no good either, right? As we know from God's word. So there's no house nor harbor. Isaiah, here in verse 1, it says that there is no house and no harbor. Isaiah pictures sailors from Tyre in the land of Cyprus, and in Egypt hearing of the destruction of the harbor of Tyre. So you can imagine, look at there once again in verse 1, where it says, the burden or the judgment against Tyre, wail, ye ships of Tarshish, for it laid waste. And here, if you can kind of picture what he's getting at here, is also with the sailors, those who, that was basically their business, that was their livelihood, them going to these different ports. And either selling goods, or they were sailors working for someone, offloading and all these different things going on. And so here, this is the reason for the wailing. This was their livelihood. And it's not that it was only their pay, but it was also probably their produce, all of their different supplies that were needed for survival. So all of these things have been destroyed and taken away. Then we come down, notice in verse 6 here of the text, it says, cross over to Tarshish, wail, ye inhabitants of the coastland. Verse 6, is this your joyous city, whose antiquity is from ancient days, whose feet carried her far off to dwell? Who has taken this counsel against Tyre, the crowning city, whose merchants are princes, whose traders are the honorable of the earth? Notice who's done this. He asks a question in the last verse, and notice in verse 9 it says, the Lord of hosts has purposed it, to bring to dishonor the pride of all glory, to bring into contempt all the honorable of the earth. And so notice, a couple things we'll bring out here, especially in this section here, verses 6 through 9. So we mentioned about why that the inhabitants of the coastland are basically wailing. We've talked about that. But then notice down in verse 7, he says, is this your joyous city, whose antiquity is from ancient days? And again, this is one of those areas where it goes way back into history. So I'm sure there's a lot of pride involved here. And again, going back, fast forwarding, think about our own nation. We take so much pride in our own nation and how far we go back, and all of the different things that we take sometimes even for granted what the Lord has done here in our own nation. And then it goes on. It says in verse 8, who has taken this counsel against Tyre, the crowning city, whose merchants are princes, whose traders are the honorable of the earth? I'm sure that our nation has been looked at as honorable. You think about most wars that we've gone into, well, at least it says on the outside, I don't even know the politics part, but for all purposes, we've gone to most of our wars to be able to help other nations. Think about World War I, World War II, other wars. You can go right on down. How that we've entered them mainly to be able to assist other countries. And I would say that was pretty much honorable. But notice it goes on, and it says in verse 9, the Lord of hosts has purposed it. So even though there was a lot of probably we would say good going on, in God's eyes it wasn't really anything at all worth of note. Even the quote-unquote honorable ones, that really doesn't mean anything to God. Because again, who was it that was calling each other honorable? It was people calling each other honorable. It wasn't God deeming them honorable. It was basically judging themselves by themselves.
Right.
And so that's the danger. That's the danger of even today, where whenever we judge ourselves by ourselves, we look at our own selves and go, well, I'm better than this guy over here is. Whereas, as we mentioned from time to time along the way, our litmus test is not what Joe down the street is doing or not doing for God. It's what I'm doing or not doing for God according to His Word. Right. And here again in this text where he says in verse 9, the Lord of hosts has purposed it, this judgment against Tyre, to bring to dishonor the pride, notice that word, the pride of all glory. So what were they glorying in? It was in their own selves. Yeah. It wasn't in God. They weren't glorifying Him. They weren't bringing Him honor and glory. It was all about themselves. And also it says at the end of verse 9, to bring into contempt all the honorable of the earth. And then we notice and hear a couple different things here. Verse 9 there, where it talks about the Lord of hosts has purposed it to bring to dishonor the pride and glory. Because of its great success, Tyre had become proud and full of self-glory. They no longer needed God, well, not that they were living for Him anyway, but they sure didn't think they needed Him, even if there was the thought, potential. Why? Because they were self-absorbed. But the Lord of hosts has purposed to judge and humble Tyre, and Isaiah here again announces it. There's a theologian by the last name of Jennings, and he says this about this portion. He says, pride is that basic sin to which God is ever opposed. A man is ever expressing. Isn't that true? You think about that. Nothing's changed even from the beginning. It's always been pride. And what did the serpent or Satan ultimately tempt Adam and Eve with? It was pride. Basically thinking, hey, God's holding something good from you here. And he was trying to get them to understand, or at least try to understand, the fact that, this is actually, it was a prideful motivation, is what he was appealing to them. So it really comes down to pride. And Jennings hit it right on the head. Notice in verses 10 down through verse 14, it says, overflow through the land like the river, O daughter of Tarshish, there is no more strength. He stretched out his hand over the sea. He shook the kingdoms. The Lord has given a commandment against Canaan to destroy its strongholds. And he said, you will rejoice no more, O you oppressed virgin daughter of Sidon. Arise, cross over to Cyprus. There also you will have no rest. Behold, the land of the Chaldeans, this people which was not, Assyria founded it for wild beasts of the desert. They set up its towers, they raised up its palaces and brought it to ruin. And let's pause there for a moment and notice, going back there to verse 12, I just want to make a point there. As we mentioned in the outset, where it talks about, and you will rejoice no more, you oppressed virgin daughter of Sidon, arise, cross over to Cyprus, and there was that land mass there, which they were able to cross over to Cyprus, or even from boat, which they could. But notice it says, there also you will have no rest. Why? Because it doesn't really matter where you're trying to run to. You're not going to escape God's judgment upon you if God has ordained that you're going to be judged. And that's what he's saying. You can run wherever you think you want it, you can run to. You can run to the ends of the earth. And God still, if you're forgetting Him, neglecting Him, there's still going to be that judgment upon you. And it's going to continue to follow you until you turn to Him. And really, you can say the same thing with our lives too. We may not be running physically as far as to another nation But you think about our own lives. If we're running away from God, if we're not where we should be with God, he's going to chase us down if we're his children. And you think about even those who are not his children, how that he brings us to salvation. He works in our hearts to be able to carry that out. So that's actually a blessing, should be a blessing to us as his children. You think about Jonah. He's probably one of the greatest examples in the Bible of this. Where did he think he was going to run to? Ironically, down to Tarshish, right? And so here you see how that he tried to run from God, and how did that work out? Didn't work out very well, did it? And even whenever he got his attention, he still was not really willing to want to obey God, unfortunately. So here we see the Chaldeans here again and trying to run, and again they're giving this verse here in verse 12 where he says, "O you oppressed virgin, daughter of Sidon, arise, cross over to Cyprus, there you will have no rest." So once again with this thought in mind. Verse 15 and 16, moving down, it says, "Now it shall come to pass in that day that Tyre will be forgotten 70 years, according to the days of one king. At the end of 70 years, it will happen to Tyre, as in the song of the harlot. Take a harp, go about the city, you forgotten harlot. Make sweet melody, sing many songs, that you may be remembered." And then verse 17 says, "And it shall be at the end of the 70 years that the Lord will deal with Tyre. So will return to her hire and commit fornication with all the kingdom of the world on the face of the earth." And then notice verse 18, it says at the very last verse here of the chapter, it says, "Her gain and her pay will be set apart for the Lord. It will not be treasured nor laid up, for her gain will be for those who dwell before the Lord to eat sufficiently and for fine clothing." So a couple things here to point out. Notice in verse 15, where it says Tyre will be forgotten 70 years. Here God's judgments are so precise that he decrees the exact number of years Tyre will be forgotten. That's amazing, isn't it, when you stop and think about that?
Yeah.
Here he's saying it's going to be 70 years. And how many years is it going to be? It will be 70 years. Think about the nation of Israel whenever they were wandering in the wilderness. They were there for 40 years. And that's what God had purposed, was them to wander around in that 40 years. And what was that? That wasn't like some magic number. What was the purpose of it? So that generation would basically have died off, that had forgotten God. And here he mentions, even here, this is the years of the normal lifespan of a king. And he mentions that even in this text. So once again, the king that had forgotten God, he's going to keep that 70 years until that time span has elapsed, where he would have basically had died off as well, just like the group there in the wilderness. Then notice in verse 16 where it says that you may be remembered. Here, quoting what may have been a well-known song in his day, Isaiah makes the point that at the end of the 70 years appointed by God, Tyre will be remembered again. So once again, who's the one causing Tyre to drop off, and who's going to be the one to basically bring Tyre back to being able to be of note again? It's going to be God. God's going to be the one that does this work. And you also have to think about that too. At that point, Tyre would have actually been totally decimated financially. God's going to have it overrun. But once again, and what's the point there is that the people of Tyre could not have brought it back by themselves. It was going to have to be an act of God that brought that about. And then verse 17 where it says she will return to her hire, here again, going in with God will allow Tyre, symbolized by a prostitute, to continue her gross materialism with all the kingdoms of the world, but her gain and her pay will be set apart for the Lord. Ultimately, the riches of Tyre, so desperately sought, will be given to the Lord anyway. Isn't that amazing? How that even though they're not doing it for the proper reasons, even after all of that, the Lord will still be honored in it. And also there at the end of verse 17 where it says the Lord will deal with Tyre, many commentators think that this refers to the presence of Christianity in Tyre in the days of the early church. Adam Clark says this at the conclusion of this portion. He says, Tyre, after its destruction by Nebuchadnezzar, recovered, as it is here foretold, its ancient trade, its wealth and grandeur, as it did likewise after a second destruction by Alexander the Great. It became Christian early with the rest of the neighboring countries. Paul himself found many Christians there. In Acts 21 and verse 4, he mentions this. It suffered much in the Diocletian persecution. It was an archbishop under the Patriarch of Jerusalem with 14 bishops under its jurisdiction. It continued to be Christian until it was taken by the Sarkians in 639 and was recovered by the Christians in 1124. But in 1280 it was conquered by the Mamelukes and afterwards taken from them by the Turks in 1517. Since that time it has sunk into utter decay. Talking about here this area of Tyre. It now is a mere ruin, a bare rock, a place to spread nets upon, as the prophet Ezekiel foretold it should be in chapter 26 and verse 14. So here once again we see how that in spite of all of this, we see how that even for these nations, how that they're still not seeing the purpose of God's judgment. That to me is what blares out through all of this, is that they're judged, and even and all the way through the Old Testament, and you think about this, you say, well, they're not God's people. They're not really serving him. So, why would they really in essence? Well, the real question mark is why would God's people not return to him fully and just trust him from that point on? Because they're so easily swayed if they're not truly following after the Lord. And that's the same thing with our lives too. If we're not careful in our own lives, we can be easily swayed not to obey, not to trust in our God each day. And all it takes is something that's maybe even beyond our control to get our minds and our hearts, well, maybe God's not watching after me anymore. Maybe he's, when we start questioning his ways or his means and all these different things that goes on maybe in our minds, and who knows what it was ultimately that really started the ball rolling with some of these areas as far as even with God's people along the way in the Old Testament. But all it takes is that one doubt, or as we were mentioning once again tonight, even just the area of pride. That one area of pride in the heart, well, hey, look what all we're doing. We can be self-sufficient. Why do we need God at all? And once again, once that starts going down the hill, it's hard to stop it until we turn back to God. And again, this is exactly what's happening here with Tyre. This is exactly why they will be judged. We see even the amount of years that they'll be judged. But then also, God gives them hope, right? And he gives them hope at the very end to turn back to him. And even though it's already foretold what they'll do and how they'll respond, we see that even in that, God's still going to be glorified no matter what. He's still going to get his rightful due. And so we see that here even there at the end of the chapter. All right, any other thoughts here? Comments on what? Yes?
Pastor, I have this that God will destroy that because of the people's pride. So pride separates people from God, and he will not tolerate it. If we examine our life, we must remember that all true accomplishment comes with the help of God. Because sometimes we forget that,
That's
everything is because of God, what's happening in his life. And also, I think, Ty, God punished them because of that. And also, I can see, what is that country? That country in South America, Venezuela. See, God took out the hand from them because for everything what they was doing, and for so many years they was suffering, and people was going to all around South America because of so many things they was doing in there.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
So
Yeah, and it's amazing too, how that even though we look around at our own country, even now, we see what's going on. Alan and I went out for dinner this evening, and we're talking about that very fact, just how that we look around at our own country and how that we can become so disillusioned. But I really believe that it's also because of God's judgment. And if we're not placing our trust fully in Him, even as a nation, we're going to be judged too. We're seeing that. And by the way, nothing's going to stop that from happening necessarily. Now, we can pray, we can ask the Lord to stem it. I believe it all really starts in the house of God. That's where He's going to start. And if we're not where we should be as the church, that's where judgment will begin. It begins in the house of the Lord. But as far as a nation, it will also be judged. And you think about the pride in our nation. I've mentioned that before. And I love Old Glory like anyone else should. But on the flip side, I think over the years we've become so prideful in our own nation that sometimes we can forget that it's the hand of God that's got us to the point where we are even today.
That's right.
And if we continue to forget Him as a nation, then we'll be judged as a nation.
Right.
That's
And
right.
just like we have to remember, I brought that out a couple weeks ago, we also have to remember these prophets weren't exempt from the judgment of God either. They still lived there in amongst all the people. So they were in with it all. But what was the difference? They understood why everything was happening. They weren't becoming angry and bitter at God because of the judgment. They understood, hey, it's because of our sin as a people that God is righteously and rightfully judging us. And so once again, we see that being borne out, I believe, even in our own country today. And just like Maxine was pointing out again, it really stems down to pride. We saw that even here with Tyre. He brings that up twice, just in the one chapter. There's, if you look at this chapter, there's only the 18 verses, and here to be brought up twice in the same chapter, that's pretty prideful. As far as it goes with this people. And once again, if God was talking about our nation, it'd probably be mentioned even more than that, I would dare say. All right, anybody else? Yes, Jim?
Pastor, first time, it's in my Bible, it says the Lord of hosts has purposed it to defile the pompous pride. And boy, that's really the case today in our nation. It's pompous. It's intentional,
Yeah,
big time,
right.
sadly.
Yeah. They just fly in the face of God.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah. Buddy, you had your hand up?
Yeah, well, that's what I was telling you when I came in here. If you notice today, they are blaming these political parties instead of seeing the real answer.
Yes.
They need to turn back from their wicked ways, the Christians and all, and they want to get their eyes off of themselves and blame others, and they need to be looking at themselves.
Instead of waiting for the next 4 years to go by, we need to get on our knees and get before the Lord.
Because y'all have said it before, not getting into all the political thing. What happened to this election time? What happened? It shouldn't happen like that, but it did. Nobody wanted it because it's a reason, and you said it. You kind of believe that we're getting away from the Lord. And I'm going to ask you about that 40-year thing. I never thought about it. Is that what that 40 years, did He give them long enough that they would pass on?
For that generation.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, because they probably was up in age, a lot of them, and so about 40 would add it to it, so they'd be kind of getting a little older, wasn't they?
Yeah, so they wouldn't see the promised land, because they didn't even have enough faith in him to even get there. So, yeah. And I mean, and then there was even some that were just along the way. I mean, God would pour out other judgments along the way. It wasn't just wandering in the desert for 40 years. There, you think about even some of those whenever Moses came down from the mount and they were all sinning,
Yeah.
the earth opened up
Yeah.
and swallowed some of those individuals in judgment. So God took care of the generation that was not pleasing him for sure. And again, going back to the, not to beat a dead horse, but to get back to us today, why should we think that we're going to be exempt from God's judgment if we're not where we should be? So it's not just against ungodly nations, it begins with his own people. And we've seen that even here in Isaiah from chapter 1, where it's dealing with his people first. And then it branches out, and he's going to deal with all evil and all sinfulness against him. So,
Yeah, as the things was going on, and we was really being blessed, everything was good, the churches was dwindling. People was getting up to Kings and Minions and Disney Worlds and going and doing, and they were so blessed. And God's not going to be happy with that.
yeah.
And, you know, he's not going to put up with it. Like you said, it's not, we ain't that great that he's going to let us get out with it. Because he would have to bring Solomon and Gomorrah back and apologize to him. Because we living just like that, a lot of that's going on today.
If not worse. Yes. Anybody else? All right. Well, we'll pick up in chapter 24 then next week. All right, their prayer bulletin. Oh, by the way, I wanted to make mention, one that we want to just thank everybody that was praying for them. They had went up to the Amish country and up to Pennsylvania, and they had a good trip. And so that was a blessing. I'm sure it was great for Bill just to be able to get out of the house and whatnot too.
Absolutely.
So continue to pray for him. There wasn't too much update with him this week, just the ongoing pain, and continue to pray for him. Let's see. I did talk to Sylvia, by the way, this afternoon, and so anyway, we've been trying to get a hold of her, and they just kept going to voicemail. I think Al and Linda were trying to get on her too. So I was about to call. I got kind of distracted this afternoon, but I was going to call her daughter. I'm glad I did it in hindsight. Anyway, she's fine. And anyway, and the good news is the swelling in her feet and ankles that's gone down considerably. So that's a blessing. The vertigo, she said it's still there, but it's not as bad as it has been at all. So that's a blessing too. So continue to pray for her. And she does have a doctor's appointment tomorrow, so continue to pray for Sylvia. I asked her if she was able to come tonight, but she said that probably not tonight. But anyway, pray that she'd be able to get back in church too, because I know that it's really important to her, and it's important to all of us. And so just pray that she'd be able to get her strength back to where she can be back with us too.
Another thing she was concerned about too, was somebody walking her dog.
She mentioned that.
Yeah, she just, if anybody knows anybody that walks dogs or
Yeah.
anything, she just would love to somebody walk her own dog.
She was telling me about how much people are charging for that.
Yes.
But it has to be a lady, the dog doesn't like men.
Right. Oh, I know. I've been over there. His eyes were all kind of buggy and was running off. We haven't met. But okay. But yes, if you know anybody that can do that inexpensively, I know she would appreciate that. So continue to pray for Stephen Dorton. We've just left him there with the Asher to just keep before you. Again, this is the pastor at Riverside Baptist there at Beaver Dam. And from the last we'd heard from Jack, gave us the last update was he's paralyzed on his left side and he's able to talk but cannot swallow at this time. So, yes.
He was moved to sheltering arms yesterday, I think.
Oh, okay. Was there any other update that you know of? Or,
But Don was saying that he can talk, but he's hard to understand.
okay.
You know, and the family can sort of understand him, but anyone else, it might be hard to understand what he's saying.
Yeah. Continue to pray for Pastor Jordan. That's probably a great illustration of, these guys that say, well, if you just have enough faith, nothing's going to happen to you. It's not necessarily the case, is it? Here's a man that's, preaching, living his life for God, and they just never know what the day's going to bring or what the Lord's going to allow, into our lives. And so, continue to pray for Frank and Shirley. I had a good visit with them yesterday, and their granddaughter, Crystal, had brought Shirley over to the rehab facility, and so I was able to see Shirley again yesterday too, so that worked out really good. And he'll remain there at least until the 24th, and then they'll do a reevaluation, and then if he needs to stay longer, he'll stay longer, but continue to pray for him. And continue to pray for Shirley, there with the dementia. It's really getting bad. So continue to pray for them and for the family. I had a good chance just to talk with Crystal, the granddaughter, out in the parking lot and whatnot. So continue to pray for that need too, because it's any of those of you that have dealt with family members with dementia, it can be trying, not only on the person with it, but the family members too. So continue to pray for their family if you would. Any other update on Michael at all?
No, he was able to get a vehicle gone tonight to pick it up.
Oh, no. Praise the Lord for that.
He still
Amen.
has a lot of burning on his, where he was cut, and it's been a month, and it's still hurt.
Okay. Continue to pray for Michael. And that's a blessing that was able to get the vehicle. So we're praying about that. Okay, and Betty Kramer should be having a heart. Was there an update on Betty Kramer?
No, Nancy talked to her. They're trying to add an addition to the house
Okay.
where she is, so she can get her and her husband back together. Again, they've been apart like almost a year, it seems like. And that's what they're working on now.
Gotcha.
Their health is, heart is better.
Okay. All right, continue to pray for Betty Kramer. Amy Leonard, this was a blessing. So we've had her on there for good night, probably at least 2 or 3 years, I would say.
Yeah.
This was Larry Leapart's sister, and anyway, she finally had the kidney transplant on the 5th, and the surgery went well. And this was as of this morning. The surgery went well, and they were waiting on the 72-hour period to see if the kidney is accepted. Now, he gave me that Monday evening. But the last update this afternoon was that everything seems to be going in the right direction. It seems like the body's accepting everything, and they're still waiting on some more lab work to come back. But as far as at this point, everything seems to be headed in the right direction. So that's a definite answer to prayer. So if you need to pray for Amy Leonard, if you would.
Pastor.
Yes.
Linda's got an update on Eloisa.
Okay.
She called me Sunday afternoon and she said she just got in there to the hospital. She'd been in there for 8 days, she said. And her legs were swelling and she said it was hard, but she said, no operation, no Eloisa.
But she has been back in the hospital, yeah.
Okay.
8 days.
Follow with her for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Be praying for Russie. Some point here in August, she'll be having the Mohs surgery there on her hand. So be praying for that. I talked to John Rhodes today, and so continue to pray for Bev. She'll be having that her tooth extracted on the 22nd, and so we just really pray that they're able to do that. I can't believe that had to be put off like it did, and then you're talking still till the 22nd, and I can't imagine the pain that she's going through even just with that. And also, we didn't put all of the details in here, but also he had mentioned that at this point, because of the lymphedema, she can basically only go from the bed to a chair that they have upstairs in their room, because she's just basically immobile. So continue to pray for Beth and some real health needs there continually. So be praying for her and also for John as the caregiver, if you would. Wanda Mitchell had given me this one. It's on Clarence Sledge. He had surgery on his intestines yesterday on the 7th. He had an obstruction, but everything went well, and he's still waiting on lab results and for a follow-up with the surgeon. So continue to pray for him. Thankfully, the procedure went well, but continue to pray for him and for his healing. Kathy had given me an update on Amelia Sikora. This is her daughter. The infection's gone into her heart, but she has developed a small leak in her heart valve. And the doctors are hoping it will heal on its own. If not, she'll have to have open heart surgery again. So really be praying for Amelia, if you would. Again, this is Kathy Sullivan's daughter. And by the way, I just want to make mention of this publicly, just thanking those of you that were able to stay Sunday. I know that meant a lot to Kathy. So I really appreciate that coming, at least from me, and I'm sure the family too. So thank you for that.
It was a blessing to us too.
Yeah, sometimes the greatest blessings are the ones that you're just there for others, all right, you want to give me the update there again on Wendy?
Yes. Wendy went home Monday
Okay.
morning, last Monday, and she has to follow up with her. She had a follow-up today, and the doctor is going to send her to a neurologist to clear that up, anything that has to do with that, with her blacking out. And she has also come off of her blood pressure meds. That could have been a contributing to her blackout also. And the doctor, her blood test has shown that she may have another problem, but that'll be in the future.
Okay.
So right now, she's home. The doctor told her not to do anything for this Monday through Sunday at home, to stay in, rest, and heal, and feel better. So that's more or less what she's doing. We had to scold her a couple times, keep from trying to clean the house.
Hard to do from Virginia. All right. appreciate all the prayers for my mom and dad.
Thank you.
Mom's going to be coming home on the 17th of this month, so I appreciate the prayers there. And my sister's going to be coming down for probably about a month to kind of look after her when she gets home. So continue to pray for that. And I don't think I mentioned that publicly, but anyway, there's a group there in the area, there in central Georgia, and they're called the Mustard Seed Ministry, and they were able to build her a ramp, so that was such a blessing. So anyway, so that's one load off of their mind. And so anyway, so thank the Lord for that. So anyway, then they're going to be, the PT will be coming in 3 times a week for her, and then they'll also reevaluate everything at some point to see if she needs, as her leg heals, to see if she needs to go back into a facility to be able to actually get the therapy, because her leg is not healed to the point where they can actually start doing the actual therapy, if that makes sense, because it's not healed totally. So continue to pray for her if you would. And also, Dad had a follow-up on the 6th, and they ran an EKG and stress test, and everything came back really positive. He's able to go back to doing his regular exercise, and he was flaunting about how that he was out dragging big, huge branches out into the woods. And really, anyway, but yeah, it's not what the doctor said. But anyway, to be doing. But anyway, so apparently he's doing very well. So continue to pray for him if you would. And any update on Mick Zillis?
He is okay. I think it was a little mix-up. I don't know that he's had a stroke or seizures. I think he's
Okay.
still doing okay and is still doing physical therapy. And Linda, his wife, has some health issues that she's trying to put off until she can sort of get him a little better.
Okay. Okay, so he's doing better from.
Yes.
Okay. And does he still have the home assistance coming in?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Linda had cut it back a little bit, so
Okay.
she's doing more. But yeah, I think they are still coming in.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right, any other updates? Yes.
I don't see Junie Kirby anymore, but he's having his bladder removed on the 20th.
Okay.
Yeah, he's in the first column.
Yeah,
Did you find him?
over into the cancer.
Junie?
I missed him. I'm glad he's still there. Thank
So,
you.
so he has, say that again?
He's having his bladder removed on the 20th. So I guess the chemo didn't. There he is. He's right there.
Okay. All right, we'll be praying about this procedure. All right, for Jimmy Kirby? Yes?
Were you able to reach Barney today? I know he's hard to get.
No, I didn't get a
Just to let everybody know that Barney Robinson is having difficulty with extremely high blood pressure. And he also has a cardiologist appointment scheduled. Ray thought it was sometime this week, but Barney's having difficulty. You mentioned Bill and Wanda back from the Amish country. Donna Knack is up there now.
Yay, I'm glad you
And of course, Evelyn and Teresa and their friend are traveling. But they're going to be home on Friday instead of Sunday. The lady that owns the house had a death in the family, and she has to be back Saturday for the funeral. So they'll be coming back on Friday. And good news, she'll be here Sunday for the Italian dinner.
All right. Did you hear Alan? He said he had to take care of you.
Is that the song?
She'll be back to take care of you.
I started
anybody else? Yes,
I
but,
just thought about something, about Kathy. I asked her when she was coming in about her family, she was broken hearted because they wouldn't come. She said, I tried to get them to come, they wouldn't come. And I tell people, I tell Ken all the time, when you come to Christ, most of the time, your church family is closer than your other family. And that was evidence. Well, I mean, I'm not saying we're no special, but just one, if we hadn't, people hadn't took time to do that, how much that was a blessing to Kathy.
that's right.
Because, I mean, where was she been? The family wouldn't come. Who would honor her mama now? So, I mean, you know, the little things don't look like much, but I could see it in when I was walking, she was up there looking down at the stuff up there, and like I said, the family turned on them, kind of, and the church family kicked in, but it is true. You got a new family when you come to Christ. The old family, if they don't have Christ, that family, that's Satan. You hope they come to Christ. But you, most of the time, a lot of times, your church family is closer than you, and that was the kind of evidence right there.
Yeah. And it's eternal family.
Right.
That's the beauty of it, you know? Yeah.
And that was wonderful. Wasn't it wonderful? I was rowdy, but nobody was wonderful.
Yes. Very well done. All right, anybody else?
Pastor,
Yes.
I just want to thank you, everybody, for the prayers. The babies, my granddaughter's doing much better.
Yes, she is.
She started eating food, so it's good.
Continue to pray. Yeah. She was struggling with COVID, right?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes, she was
Daughter,
good.
okay. Your daughter's
Yeah, she's still improving. The baby, there was concern pneumonia because she had a high fever.
All right, anyone else?